The most exclusive badge in the car world isn't Rolls-Royce, Bentley, or Ferrari. It's a name most car fans can't even pronounce, Maybach. But it didn't start as a billionaire's toy. It started with the engineer behind the world's first car engine. It vanished, came back, failed, buried again, clawed back. Here's why that name now outranks the three-pointed star itself. The engine genius behind the legend. Picture Germany in the 1880s. Cars don't exist yet. Not really. There's a workshop, and inside it, two men are hunched over a wooden bench trying to solve a problem nobody had ever solved before. How do you build an engine small enough, light enough, and powerful enough to actually move a vehicle? One of those men is Gottlieb Daimler. The other is Wilhelm Maybach. Now, most people know Daimler's name. It's on badges. It's in the company history. But Maybach was the guy actually doing a huge chunk of the engineering. He wasn't just an assistant, he was the technical brain. Daimler had the vision and the business connections. Maybach had the hands and the mind that turned sketches into working machines. Together, they built the first Daimler engine in 1885, and that engine went on to power one of the earliest motorcycles in human history. A year later, they slotted a version of it into a carriage, and just like that, the automobile as we know it started to take shape. Maybach didn't stop there. He kept refining. He invented the spray nozzle carburetor, a device that mixed fuel and air way more efficiently than anything before it. That single invention helped make engines practical for actual road use instead of just science experiments. By the time Daimler passed away in 1900, Maybach had become the chief designer for what was now Daimler Motorengesellschaft, the company that would eventually become Mercedes-Benz. In fact, the very first car to carry the Mercedes name, the 1901 Mercedes 35 horsepower, was designed under Maybach's direction. Let that sink in for a second. The man whose name is now stitched into the most luxurious rear seats on the planet helped create the car that literally birthed the Mercedes brand. But here's where things get interesting. Maybach eventually left Daimler in 1907 after some internal disagreements about direction. And instead of retiring, he did what any obsessive engineer would do. He started building engines for something completely different. Airships, specifically Zeppelins. Along with his son Karl, Wilhelm Maybach founded a company to build lightweight, high-output engines for the massive airships that were becoming a symbol of German engineering dominance. These weren't small projects. Zeppelins needed engines that were powerful but incredibly light, because every extra pound meant less lift in the sky. It was some of the most demanding engineering work of that entire era, and the Maybach name became synonymous with precision under pressure. This wasn't a side hustle. This was a full engineering empire being built quietly in the shadow of the aviation boom. And it set the stage for something nobody expected. The Maybachs were about to pivot from the sky straight down to the road. Cars fit for kings and emperors. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles put heavy restrictions on German airship and aircraft production. So Karl Maybach, running the family business at this point, looked at his father's incredible engine-building expertise and made a bold decision. If they couldn't keep building engines for the sky at the same scale, they'd build the finest cars on Earth instead. In 1921, the Maybach company unveiled its first car, the W3. But it was the cars that came after that truly built the legend. The Maybach Zeppelin, launched in the early 1930s, was an absolute monster of engineering. It packed a massive V12 engine, an almost unheard-of feature at the time, and it came with something called the Doppelschnellgang transmission, a dual overdrive gearbox that let the car cruise smoothly at high speed while still being usable in stop-and-go traffic. Remember, this is decades before smooth-shifting automatics became normal. Maybach was solving problems most manufacturers hadn't even identified yet. These cars weren't for regular wealthy people. They were built for royalty, industrialists, and heads of state. We're talking hand-built bodies, custom coachwork, and interiors that rivaled the finest furniture makers in Europe. A Maybach in the 1930s wasn't just a car. It was a rolling declaration that you were at the absolute top of society. Fewer than 2,000 Maybach cars were ever produced during this entire era, which tells you just how rare and exclusive they were even back then. But then World War II happened, and everything changed. The factory shifted to military production, like most German manufacturers at the time, building engines for tanks and other vehicles instead of luxury cars. And when the war ended, the factory in Friedrichshafen was in ruins. The company that had once built engines for airships and cars for kings had no infrastructure left to build anything. Karl Maybach made a decision that would define the brand for the next 60 years. Instead of trying to rebuild a car company from scratch in a devastated country, Maybach shifted entirely into building diesel engines, mostly for trains, trucks, and industrial use. The car-making chapter of Maybach's story, at least for now, was over. 60 years of silence. Here's the part of the story most people skip right over, and it's honestly one of the most fascinating parts. For over half a century, Maybach cars simply didn't exist. The name lived on, but only as an engine manufacturer. In 1960, Maybach Motorenbau merged with Daimler-Benz, becoming part of the same corporate family that owned Mercedes. But the focus stayed on industrial engines. Massive diesel power plants for ships, locomotives, and heavy machinery. Not a single Maybach passenger car rolled off a production line for 6 decades. Think about how wild that is. A brand that once built cars for emperors spent longer as a dormant engine maker than most car companies have even existed. If you were a car enthusiast in the 1970s or 80s, the name Maybach probably meant nothing to you unless you were deep into industrial diesel technology. The badge that once sat on rolling palaces was essentially retired, sitting quietly inside Daimler's corporate portfolio, waiting. And here's the thing about legendary brand names. Big companies don't like letting them die completely. Somewhere in the back of Mercedes's boardroom, executives knew they were sitting on a piece of automotive royalty that was just gathering dust. The question wasn't if they'd bring it back, it was when and how. The resurrection that flopped. Fast forward to the early 2000s. Mercedes-Benz is looking at the ultra-luxury market and seeing companies like Rolls-Royce and Bentley absolutely dominating it. Mercedes had the S-Class, which was already excellent, but it wasn't in the same stratosphere as a Rolls-Royce Phantom. So in 2002, Mercedes made a bold move. They revived Maybach as its own separate, standalone ultra-luxury brand, completely distinct from Mercedes-Benz. No three-pointed star on these cars. Just the Maybach name and its own distinct badge. They launched 2 models, the Maybach 57 and the Maybach 62, with the numbers referring to the length of the car in decimeters. These were enormous, opulent machines. We're talking reclining rear thrones, champagne coolers, individual climate zones, and a ride quality so smooth that engineers reportedly balanced tires down to fractions of a gram just to eliminate any hint of vibration. Prices started around $300,000 and climbed well past that for fully customized versions. On paper, this should have worked perfectly. But it didn't. And the reason why is one of the most talked about case studies in automotive branding. Buyers who could spend that kind of money already had a very clear idea of what ultra-luxury meant. Rolls-Royce meant heritage stretching back over a century, with British royal warrants and a level of prestige that felt untouchable. Bentley meant motorsport pedigree combined with old-money British craftsmanship. Maybach, despite the beautiful engineering, felt to many wealthy buyers like a very, very expensive Mercedes wearing a costume. The underlying platform, while heavily modified, still shared DNA with the S-Class, and rumors about that connection spread fast in the circles that actually bought these cars. When you're spending $400,000, perception is everything, and the perception war was one Maybach was quietly losing. Sales never got close to what Mercedes hoped for. They were targeting around 2,000 units a year. Some years, they sold barely 200 worldwide. By 2011, Mercedes announced the brand would be discontinued as a standalone marque, and by 2013, production quietly ended. 60 years of dormancy, followed by an 11-year experiment that ultimately couldn't crack the code of old money prestige. It looked like Maybach's story might finally be over for good, rising from the ashes again. But Mercedes had learned something crucial from that failure, and instead of giving up on the name, they completely rethought the strategy. In 2015, Maybach came back, but this time not as a rival brand sitting awkwardly next to Mercedes. Instead, it became Mercedes-Maybach, a top-tier trim level built directly on top of the S-Class. Think of it less like a separate company and more like what AMG does for performance, except Maybach does it for ultimate luxury. This approach was smart for a few reasons. First, it leaned directly into the Mercedes brand equity instead of fighting against it. Buyers weren't confused about what they were getting. It was clearly a Mercedes, just the most decadent, most stretched, most meticulously finished version imaginable. Second, it let Mercedes actually turn a profit on the platform sharing instead of building an entirely separate car from the ground up. And third, and maybe most importantly, it matched what the modern ultra-wealthy actually wanted. Discretion with a badge people instantly recognized, rather than an obscure name that needed explaining at every valet stand. The strategy worked. Mercedes-Maybach S-Class sales took off, especially in markets like China and the Middle East, where the demand for extended wheelbase luxury sedans with maximum rear seat comfort is enormous. Mercedes noticed this success and expanded the lineup. Today, you can get a Mercedes-Maybach version of the GLS SUV, giving ultra-wealthy families a 3-row luxury option with that same Maybach treatment. There's even an all-electric Mercedes-Maybach EQS, proving that the badge is being positioned for a future well beyond gasoline engines. Now, before we get into exactly what separates a Maybach from a regular Mercedes under the surface, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the brands hiding behind the badges you see every day, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which luxury brand story you want us to cover next, subscribe if you haven't already, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this. Okay, let's get back into it. So what actually makes a Maybach? A Maybach? So here's the big question we've been building toward this entire video. If a Mercedes-Maybach is built on the exact same platform as a regular Mercedes S-Class, what are you actually paying for? Let's break it down piece by piece because the differences are a lot more significant than most people assume. Start with the wheelbase. Every Mercedes-Maybach gets a stretched wheelbase compared to the standard long wheelbase S-Class, and almost all of that extra length goes directly into rear legroom. We're talking several extra inches specifically engineered to make the back seat feel less like a car and more like a private lounge. The rear seats themselves can recline much further than a standard S-Class. Some configurations allow the front passenger seat to fold completely forward, so the person in the back right seat can stretch their legs out entirely, essentially turning the back of the car into a first-class airline seat. Then there's sound. Mercedes-Maybach models get significantly more sound insulation than the standard car, including acoustic glass that's noticeably thicker, extra sealing around the doors, and additional damping material throughout the body. Engineers have talked about targeting near-silent cabin conditions, aiming for a ride so quiet that conversations in the back seat feel like they're happening in a private room, rather than a moving vehicle. This isn't a small tweak. It's an entirely different acoustic engineering target from day one of development. Materials are another massive differentiator. Where a loaded S-Class already uses beautiful leather and wood trim, Maybach models push that even further with exclusive quilted leather patterns, real wood trim finished with more layers of lacquer, and details like illuminated Maybach badges on the door sills and headrests that simply don't exist on a regular Mercedes. Some special editions have used materials like vegan silk alternatives or unique two-tone leather combinations reserved exclusively for the Maybach nameplate. Every single one of these details exists purely to signal, the moment you sit down, that you're in something different. Ride quality gets its own dedicated engineering pass too. Maybach models typically get a unique suspension tune, sometimes with additional adaptive damping specifically calibrated for smoothness over sharpness. Remember, this isn't about performance driving. This is about floating over broken pavement so gently that a glass of champagne wouldn't ripple in the cup holder. That's a genuinely different engineering philosophy than the sportier, more connected feel Mercedes engineers give the AMG models we've talked about before. And then there's exclusivity itself. Maybach models are produced in far smaller numbers than standard S-Class trims, and pricing typically starts tens of thousands of dollars above the top standard S-Class trim, climbing well past $200,000 for fully loaded configurations. You're not just paying for materials and engineering, you're paying for scarcity, and scarcity is one of the most powerful currencies in the ultra-luxury world. So bringing it all the way back to where we started, Wilhelm Maybach helped design the very first Mercedes. Decades later, his name would become the ultimate expression of what Mercedes is capable of when money and craftsmanship are pushed to their absolute limit. It disappeared for 60 years. It came back and failed as a standalone brand because you can't manufacture heritage overnight, no matter how good your engineering is. And it came back again, smarter this time, wearing the very badge it once helped create. Mercedes builds excellent luxury cars. AMG builds emotional performance machines. And Maybach builds a rolling 5-star hotel suite for people who genuinely don't think twice about the price tag. Same company, same factories in some cases, completely different mission. And that right there is the wild, twisting story of Maybach. From engine sketches on a workbench in the 1880s to airships floating over Germany, to cars built for kings, to 6 decades of complete silence, to a failed billion-dollar experiment, and finally, to becoming the crown jewel sitting quietly on top of the Mercedes lineup today. Not many brands get a second chance after a total collapse, let alone a story this deep hiding behind a badge most people just glance past every day. If you learned something new today, that's exactly why this channel exists. We dig into the stories behind the badges, the engineering behind the legends, and the history that most car videos never bother to tell you. So if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed because we've got a lot more of these breakdowns coming, and you genuinely don't want to miss them. Drop a comment down below and let me know. Would you actually want a Maybach, or does a proper AMG make more sense to you? I read every single comment, and I love seeing where you all land on this stuff. If you want to go even deeper into this world, go check out our video on AMG right after this one. It pairs perfectly with everything we just talked about. Thanks for riding along with me on this one. I'll see you in the next video.